Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body Summit, an online event to align with your body's intelligence for healing, optimal living, and spiritual awakening. Brought to you by Sounds True. Throughout this summit, 32 experts will share practical tools and breakthrough insights that have emerged from the convergence of science and time-honored perspectives from the world's spiritual traditions. As we learn to recognize and honor the incredible wealth of knowledge that lies within our bodies, we can begin to listen and attend to ourselves more fully, opening a doorway to greater health and well-being. Hi, everybody. Today, I'm excited to welcome a senior teacher with the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and former president of the Kripalu Center, Jonathan Foust. As a body-centered inquiry expert, Jonathan will be sharing a presentation with us today that's titled The Body Knows: How to Develop Kinesthetic Intuition. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Christy. As you mentioned, I had been president of Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, which is like one of the largest yoga and health centers in the country. And I'd been a senior teacher for many years and then moved into the administration and found out after a few very difficult years of being president that I was better suited as a teacher. I was seriously burned out. I gave everything I had to really turning the place around. And at one point I realized I just can't keep going. So I talked with the board, arranged my departure over a 6-month period. And whenever you're at the top of an organization, it's difficult to leave with everything cleaned up. So there was some politics and some ill feelings as I went out the door. And I had a couple difficult relationships that were kind of painful. And I realized that the best thing for me to do to kind of heal and lick my wounds and figure out what's next in my life was to go to a month-long Vipassana retreat. And what I found was in the probably about halfway through the retreat, I started developing this really intense pain in my upper mid-back. And I've spent about 24 years living in a yoga community. I've got lots of yoga tools. So I did everything you could imagine to kind of make this go away. So I did, slow yoga, fast yoga, hot yoga, pranayama, visualization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as I was working with one of the teachers in my interview, I told him what I was doing. And he said, maybe you're dealing with it superficially. Have you ever tried just being with it? And that never occurred to me. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to be with it. And I determined in the next meditation that I was going to sit still no matter what. Because previous to that, the tension would build and then I'd move and it'd go crack, 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 and then it would feel fine. And then the tension would start to build again, this deep, deep inner clench. So as I sat with it, I decided that I was just going to shift to just noticing it, not trying to manipulate it, but just to be present to the sensations as they were. So as I'm sort of naming or noting what's there, this is red hot pain. This is waves of red hot pain. Now this is white. This is kind of a white radiant heat. Now this feels like pulsating white light. Now this feels like a point of white light. This feels like the tip of a knife. This feels like I'm being stabbed in the back. And then suddenly my eyes opened. And I had this full recall of feeling like someone had stabbed me in the back. This is someone who had told me one thing and behind my back, told other people other things. It's all part of the politics around my presidency. And as I sat with that realization, suddenly there were these waves of emotion that came up. There was anger and naming anger, and then the anger turned into rage and naming rage. And I watched how the rage began to shift. And then I felt sadness and I named the sadness and the sadness began to shift. And then there was shame and self-consciousness. And I made room for that. And I continued to name all these different emotions that were just sort of emanating out of this space of my body. And then I reached a point where I suddenly was able to do a role reversal with the other person. And I realized that this other person was terrified of losing their job. They totally threw me under the bus, but they were acting out of fear. And I got it. And suddenly I felt my heart full, and it was such a powerful experience. And if you've ever sat at Spirit Rock, the meditation center is up high, and you do the slow morning walk down to breakfast. This was the 6:45 set, and I had so much energy, I just skipped all the way down. And I was stunned by that experience. And here's an interesting metaphor that I'd like to talk about with you. It's a common metaphor. It's from Joseph Campbell, where he talks about, imagine there's a big line, and there's a big circle, and there's a line in the middle of that circle. And above the line is everything you're aware of. Below the line is everything you're not aware of. And when you slow down and when you pay attention, you can move the line. And that's why in the practice of meditation or mindfulness, when you sit still and you pay attention, you begin to feel things you hadn't felt before. You begin to recognize thought patterns you hadn't noticed before. You begin to see beliefs you didn't believe, or you didn't realize you believed before. And this is all tied in to developing kinesthetic intuition, getting the messages that are below the line, learning how to tap into them and translate them and sense if they're really true, and then find a course of action that's going to move you forward. So what I'd like to talk about with you, and we'll do some reflections along the way, is to explore how your body is talking to you all the time, and how you can begin to shift your attention to tune into what some systems call the felt sense of how your body holds an experience. We can think of this as kinesthetic intuition. It's the intuition of the body. I'd like to talk about a formula that can help you to attend to what's between you and feeling free through this lens of the body. And then to share with you two formulas that they're killer. They're really helpful. They can really bring you to clarity around a challenging decision you have in your life. So I have this thing in my life. When people tell me they're going through a relational breakup, I can't help but ask this question. When did you know it wasn't going to work? And I'm surprised. It's probably 85% of the time. People will tell me, I knew in the beginning. And in many relationships I've been in, I've had that same sense. I look back, I knew in the beginning it wasn't going to work. What is it that makes us override that internal message that we have? There is, I believe, a knowing faculty that we have that's beyond the body and the mind. But the information gets communicated to you through a few main channels. We process information in different ways. Some of us are visual. We think in pictures. We see images. And when you talk to visual people, they use words like, this is how I see it. Can you picture this? They tend to talk fast. They use their hands because it's all images. Some people are more auditory, and they'll actually use words like, oh, that doesn't ring a bell. Or that sounds good to me. So they process through how things sound. And another form of intuition is kinesthetic intuition. And that is this felt sense arising in the body. You could say there's a fourth way that we process information, or how intuition flows. As some people call it direct cognition. You just know, and you're not even aware it came through any one of these particular filters. But what I'd like to talk about is this development of kinesthetic intuition. How you can begin to tune in to what your body's telling you. So the question is, have you ever had one of these experiences? You're working at your computer and you get this faint little signal from your body that says, I got to pee. And you override that. And then eventually the signal is so strong, you're racing off to the bathroom. Or maybe it's late at night and you get this signal from the body saying, it would be really nice to go and lie down right now. And the mind says, hey, one more chapter and I'm done with this book. You override it. Or you're out at a really, really wonderful restaurant and you get this faint little signal from your body saying, I've just achieved an optimal nutrition right now. And the mind says, but the desserts here are amazing. We tend to override the body. The mind overrides the body. I like to think of it in terms of my yogic training as the balance of what's called prana and chitta. Prana is energy, it's life force. It's what animates you. And chitta is awareness and mind. For the average person, chitta dominates prana. The mind dominates energy. So it's always trying to control things. But if you practice yoga or meditation or any form of a mind-body integration technique, you're actually reversing it. You're actually letting awareness be somewhat subservient to energy. You're amplifying energy and you're really listening to it. And when you do that, really interesting things begin to happen. A classic example, imagine you're tired, it's the end of the day, you kind of feel a flu coming on, and you decide, I'm going to take a bath, I'm going to drink some tea, I'm going to do some yoga, I'm going to go to bed early, and you wake up feeling fabulous in the morning. Well, you could say that the prana was able to really flow freely and bring you into a greater sense of balance. And indeed, what some teachers say is for the average person, that's the only time when that inversion happens, when you just release into sleep. But you can amplify this through how you pay attention. And it gets pretty exciting because you begin to recognize that your entire experience arises out of this energetic field. I love this sense of like this sort of chain of causality. There's this energetic field, prana, chi, ki, Holy Spirit, life force, whatever you want to call it. It's just free, open particles and waves. And then you experience that energy in one of three categories. It'll either be energy that feels pleasant, energy that feels unpleasant, or energy that feels neutral. Arising out of that will be a thought. And generally it's like, I like this, how can I get more? I don't like this, how can I nuke it? Or this is boring. But if you're not aware of your thoughts, and you think the same thoughts over and over and over and over and over again, those thoughts will harden into beliefs. A belief is nothing more than a calcified thought. Something you've thought 1,000 times hardens into a belief. If you're not aware of the beliefs, they form your habits. If you're not aware of your habits, they form your character. And if you're not aware of your character structure, that becomes your destiny. And that's why in classical sense-based meditation practice, when you notice you're lost in thought, you come back to the breath or to sound or to feeling. So you come back to the reality of here and now before this proliferation of thought and belief and habit and character forms. And this is all kind of tied into learning how to sort of flip this switch and amplify awareness of sensation and feeling. Because your body is communicating to you all the time. And when we override what the body is telling us, that's when the signals need to get stronger and stronger and stronger to get our attention. And that's when we come into chronic pain and all the issues that we might have tuned into more if we were sensitized more to the body. So all of this really comes down to the more you lower that line between what you're aware of and what's really going on inside, you're developing two elements in mindfulness. First is wisdom. And that's your capacity to see what's clearly, kind of transcendent of your story, your embellishments, your preferences, what's real. And then the next one is to really look carefully at how do you be with it, this whole wing of compassion. How do you hold your experience? So listening to this signal from the body becomes very, very helpful. There's a story I heard of a policeman who pulled a car over. This car was going a little bit over the speed limit in a residential area. And he wasn't that alarmed because, from looking from the outside, it was a nice car. The registration was up to date. The car was washed. He walked up to the car and something didn't feel right. And that's a magic word we'll talk about, something. He could just feel it tightening. The guy who was driving, he seemed to be calm, and he was kind of undefended as he got the registration. There was a well-dressed woman in the passenger seat, and the woman was looking straight ahead, and she had her hand on the side of her face. Everything looked okay to him, but something in his gut, it just didn't feel right. And he was curious about the woman staring straight ahead, and he tried to engage with her, but she would only turn her head a little bit toward him. And this something inside asked him to get the man to step out of the car. He said there was an issue with the registration. And then he went around to talk to the woman, and the woman finally turned to him, and he saw that the side of her face was badly bruised. And he had a conversation with her about it and about what she could do. And there was something going on with her that he picked up on. Now, the question is, when we feel that signal from inside, how do we respond? Sometimes, in this case of the policeman, it was real. But it's not that simple. The other classic story, a classic teaching story, is a woman in a village wakes up and it's the middle of the night and she needs to go and see her mother-in-law. So she's walking down the street and she sees this snake in the middle of the road, and her whole body reacts. There's a huge clench, and she runs back, and she spends the rest of the night just kind of rocking in fear because she came so close to stepping on this big snake. In the morning, she begins to wake up and poke her nose out, and she starts to head down the street very, very timidly, and she sees that actually what she thought was a snake was a piece of rope. And of course, the teaching there is we need to figure out what is a snake and what is a rope in our life. How much of what we are fearful about is just an illusion, and how much is sort of a true message from inside. And this is where developing intuition gets very complex, because we need to kind of sort out what's real and what's not real. And fortunately, there are ways to do that. So what happens is, and this is a really interesting inquiry, is it possible that every thought you have and every emotion you have is a psychobiological event? That is to say, you're experiencing it in the mind, but you're also simultaneously experiencing it in your body. So I'd like to offer just a very, very brief inquiry. Not to traumatize you, but we're going to take you into somewhat of a negative felt sense. So if you like, you can close your eyes for a moment and just imagine that you're on an elevator and you're by yourself, and the elevator doors close and you go up to the next floor, and then the elevator doors open, and then someone who's just a little bit creepy, not really creepy, but a little creepy, gets into the elevator with you. What felt sense forms when you imagine that? And if you like, you might even bring your hand to where you feel that. And just to kind of say hello to that, just the thought of a creepy person on the elevator, many people, they'll put their hand to their heart or to their throat, or they'll feel kind of a tightening. Here's a thought in your mind resonating in the body. So here's another one. Imagine you're going out to lunch, or you're going out to a restaurant, and you come out of the restaurant, and to your utter surprise, there is your best friend from high school standing there. Take a moment just to imagine if you saw your best friend like that. What felt sense begins to form on the inside? And you might bring your hand there and notice that. And quite often, people will bring their hand to their heart or maybe to their throat, a sense of expansiveness. These two examples just give you a little taste of how when you experience unpleasant sensation inside, there's a clench, a shutting down. When you experience something pleasant inside, there tends to be a sense of expansion, like a sense of like openness or ease. And this is happening all the time. The question becomes, how do we begin to tune into these signals from your body? I was very influenced by a man by the name of Dr. Eugene Genlin, who created something called focusing. And this was way back, probably 35 years ago. He was studying psychology with Carl Rogers at the University of Chicago. He just completed his PhD in philosophy. There was more here he wanted to study. And Carl Rogers said, well, basically, here's what I want you to do. Figure out what's the best technique and who are the best therapists. So he was watching people in the therapeutic process. And there was one moment when the light bulb came on for him. There was a woman who was talking with a therapist, and she said, I'm so pissed at my sister. And then she closed her eyes and she paused. And she said, I'm really disappointed in my sister. And he thought, what just happened? Here's a story coming from her mind. But when she took the time to listen to the body, that story didn't resonate with the feeling. It wasn't pissed, it was disappointed. And so he developed what was really the beginning of what we could call somatic psychology, of really exploring how what exists in the mind exists in the body and how to work it. And he said that when you really begin to listen to this felt sense, that is to say, how your nervous system holds a thought or a feeling or a story, how it will communicate will be a couple key things you can look for when you're practicing this. One is you'll feel it in the midline, in the core of the body primarily. This is down to the throat, the jaw, the lungs, the heart, the belly, the lower abdomen. And certainly you can feel sensations through the whole body, but primarily you're looking here. And there'll be three fundamental characteristics of this feeling tone or felt sense that arises. One is it'll feel strong and unmistakable. And that can be like the burning around your eyes, like you're going to cry, or the lump in your throat, or that rending feeling in your belly, or that twisted feeling in your guts like something terrible is going to happen. You can't miss it. It's right there. The second quality is that the signals from your body they're going to flicker or come in waves. If you've ever been in meditation and you feel like this wave of sadness come through, and then you try and go back and find it, it's not there. It's sort of like poof, there and gone. And the third quality, which is where a lot of the work is that what you'll feel on the inside will feel vague and unformed and kind of amorphous. And that's where the magic word something comes in. So when you're doing this inquiry, it's like there's just something kind of heavy around my heart. There's something tight in my throat. And what you want to do is draw it closer. You want to look closer and more intimately into that experience, because there's something there below the line it's unseen, it's unfelt. And if you pay attention to it and you can use language to describe it, you're going to move the line. So you can look at, try and determine its shape, its color, its texture. You can look for emotional words and see if they resonate like Jenlin noticed. Is it anger? Well, no, that's not the right word. Maybe it's disappointment. And this becomes the key to developing kinesthetic intuition. To what your body knows is your capacity to tune in and then really how to listen. So there's an interesting element of how some people have this more developed than others. And I found this really quite curious. And that is that a lot of people who have real psychic abilities, are highly, highly developed intuitives, many of them, not all of them for sure, but many of them grew up in profoundly dysfunctional homes. As you can imagine, if you're in a really dysfunctional home, and as a little child, you learn how the way the car door slams, if you're going to get hit that night, you're going to develop a very profound tuning fork to what's going on. And this is a basic function of awareness that we have. One way to think of awareness is it's something that's part of the evolutionary nature of our bodies that is just scanning for danger, basically going, don't die, don't die, don't die. You're looking for threats and making your way through the world. So we have this element that is sort of built out of hypervigilance. But when you can calm the amygdala, calm the fear, and tune into the body, you may have access to some really interesting information. So a formula, which is very, very helpful, it's been around in the mindfulness world for quite a while, is called the formula of RAIN, R-A-I-N. The R is to recognize what's happening. And the A is to inquire as to whether you can accept it or you can allow it. And then if you can, it opens up the I, which is the investigation, like really looking closer at what's presenting here. And then the transformational piece is in the N, which is to nourish what you find with empathy, kindness, and compassion. And so when your body is giving you signals all the time, this acronym comes in really, really handy. And the story I love to tell is a friend of mine who had a 7-year-old daughter, and all of her 7-year-old friends were over for this kind of get-together in their small apartment. And if you ever hung out with a bunch of 7-year-old girls, the volume level can go up. And they were all excited and giggling and screaming, and it's really starting to get on her nerves. And she was just about to walk around the corner and say, "You girls need a timeout," when she realized, wait a minute, I need a timeout. And so she went into her bedroom and she went through these steps, just recognizing. So what's happening? I'm really, really agitated and I'm about to explode. Okay. Well, the A, can I allow it? Can I actually accept this moment as it is? And she thought, well, yeah, I guess so. They're all self-contained. I can take some time with this. And an interesting element here with the A is sometimes you can't. Either it's too much or you feel flooded or the time is not appropriate, in which case you can let it know you see it and find another time. Other conditions may be helpful for that. But for her, it was okay to kind of go into it. So then she moved into the investigation. And the investigation, again, is primarily in this felt sense of the body. You can explore your thoughts and your beliefs, which is fine. But there's a lot of richness when you tune into the body. And what she began to notice was that she felt a tightness in her throat, a tightness in her chest. She kind of made room for that, just sensing, can I be with this? Can I just be kind to this feeling? And with that, she kind of unraveled a sense of like a really deep fear that she was really scared of her anger and afraid about not being a good mother. And she saw that deep sense of of her fear about not being enough for her daughter and all of her anxiety around being the right kind of person for her daughter. And she asked that, how do you want me to be with you, with that feeling? And had a sense that this felt sense inside just wanted her to see it, just wanted to be with it. And so she made room for that. And she felt a softening and a shift. And those places inside that felt tight and clenched began to open and relax. And she felt a greater sense of ease. And it didn't take that long. But these messages from the body of just listening and making room for it gave her a much more centered place inside. And here's where the killer part of the story is. She went back to join the girls. And the reason they were so excited was they were making a gift for her. And what I love about that story is, think of the fork in the road. One from just reacting and blowing up at the girls, everyone feeling terrible. And the power of stopping and kind of recognizing that there was something there was some clench inside, and taking the time to listen and to investigate it and make room for it, to offer it empathy and compassion, and from a responsive place to return, and the path that opened into a greater sense of joy and possibility. So I'm guessing that you have experienced the clench. In the Tibetan traditions, it's referred to as Shempa. And the clench is that there's something wrong here. Either there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with the world. And when we don't examine what's going on, we go into our classic reactive patterns. The possibility here is that you can pause and you can slow down and you can begin to investigate that clench. You can recognize it, ask if it's okay to be with it, if you can make room for it, and then to really tune into it. And again, part of the key here, and there's so much more to study in this, is to really look at how intimately can you experience it. Can you identify its shape, its location, its color? Are there words that resonate with it? And then to deeply listen. And this is the key part. When it comes to intuition, it's very helpful to recognize that the linear rational mind does three things really, really well. It judges and it compares and it figures stuff out. Great function. Most of us make our living with that part of the brain. But in my exploration of intuition, that anytime I've just been aware of the mystery, or I felt a really deep sense of inner listening with an intuitive sense really alive, or in a deep moment of intimacy with life or with another, or feeling a creative flow, there are three things that are profoundly not happening. I'm not comparing, I'm not judging, I'm not trying to figure anything out, I'm listening. So when you explore this, the clench, or any question you have about your life and how to shift your relationship with it, the way of listening becomes very, very important. And I think one way to think of it is that if you've ever held a small child who's sick, the child cannot communicate with you with words. If you ever held an animal that's not well, again, it's a different kind of listening. It's a whole body kind of listening. And you're listening in a way that you can sense, what is this being trying to communicate to me? What does it have to say? And here's a very interesting element, and this is what I find so powerful about developing kinesthetic intuition. And it's this whole sense that the body doesn't lie. And you can take that on as a supposition, but then experiment with it. And that is, if you have a sense, quite often, for example, if I'm working with someone and I'll ask them, what advice do you have to give yourself? And they might say, like, I just have to work harder and really focus. I say, let's validate that. When you go back into the felt sense in your body, do those words resonate for you? Do they feel true for you? And it might be, yeah, I really need to focus and I really need to, we'll get a verification. Or it might be like, no, that's not it. And then they'll need to listen a little more. And they might say, I really just I need to learn to be with this discomfort, for example. And then I might say, well, let's tune into that. Does that resonate? And they might say, yeah, that feels right. So when you can use your body as a tuning fork, it becomes very, very interesting just to try on this sense that the body doesn't lie. And if you're not clear, go back and sense if it resonates with your body. This is a really, really key element here, I found. So I'd like to do a little bit of introduction to a little longer experience that I'd like to offer. One of the big issues we run into in life is when we have a decision to make and it's not clear. And this little technique, it's been so helpful for me. And I'll just tell you a story that I quite often tell. When I moved down to Washington, D.C., no one knew me. I didn't know anyone. And I just decided I would teach anything to anyone, anytime, anywhere. So if I had an invitation to teach, I'd say yes. And I got an invitation to speak at George Mason University on a conference on positive psychology. Martin Seligman was in town, and someone had seen my resume, and they said, well, we'd like you to present, and then there'll be like a presenter's lunch and so forth. And I immediately said yes, primarily because I'm a greedy person. But it kind of felt like, yeah, I'll do it. And then what happened was I kept not responding to their emails because something didn't feel right. And the time got closer and closer and closer. They were saying, look, we need your headshot, we need your bio, we need a description of what you're going to teach. And something was really resisting inside. And then I remembered this experience, which I'll give you a description and then I'll lead you through this. What you do in this is when you have a decision to make and it's not clear, there's something, again, that word something, there's something inside that wants to do it, but then there's something inside that isn't so sure. And depending on which one of these has the microphone, you're going to be swayed by that. And quite often, what you're sensing is way below the line. It's unseen and it's unfelt. So you don't even know what it is, but it's still operative. And so in this situation, I learned this technique in my training. What you do is you create a very clear option A, option B. You can throw in an option C, but primarily you want to make it binaural. So I thought, okay, here are my options. I can send an email and say, look, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'll come up with an excuse. Option B, I'll say, I'm on, here's my information, and I'll proceed. So I got pretty clear. Those are my two options. And again, I'll be guiding you through this. You then choose one of those options. And then you tell your body, this is what we're going to do. And then you listen. You let the felt sense develop and you listen. And here's the interesting thing. Quite often, the first response is not where you end up. And that was certainly in my case. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to come up with a title and bio and headshot, and I'm going to mail it in. I'm going to do this conference. Instantly, I began to feel a tightening in my throat, a tightening in my chest, and I just sort of was with it and allowing it. And one thing you can do is really let it get big. So I kind of let that get big, and it was this feeling of like a young child, and feeling shame around older siblings and not quite ready for prime time, kind of really a horrible feeling of just sort of like scared and frightened. And I sort of tried to bring some compassion to that and kind of felt that. And an interesting question you can ask in this inquiry, and I'll be offering this when I lead you in this, is quite often when there's some form of upset in your life, there's an unmet need. There's something you're wanting, something you're hoping for that's not happening. And when you can get to that, there can be some really interesting clarity. And so as I was really sitting with this and kind of sensing the tendrils of how this whole issue was living in my nervous system, I asked, well, what does this need? And then the word help came to mind. But help? What's that? And then I realized that I taught in a university for a couple of years. I'm comfortable in that, but I had no idea who my audience was. I didn't know how to gauge my talk, whether it was academic or other people. And I realized, if I had some help figuring out who was going to be there and someone there who could look at my copy and help me align, if I had that kind of help, would I want to do it? And instantly there was a yes. It just felt expansive and I started to get excited again. So it seemed so simple to me. But what was happening was I had this decision to make, and there was something below the line, unseen, unfelt, that I wasn't paying attention to. So by going through these steps of making very clear what my options are, and then really exploring, if I took this road, what would it feel like inside? And to let that felt sense develop, to nurture what's there, to listen carefully, to ask what's needed, I kind of got my answer. And I found quite often that when you do this practice, you don't need to go down the other road, but you certainly can. So I thank you for your time, for your generous listening here. And what we'll do now is we're going to shift into a guided experience. This doesn't take too long, but we're going to take a little bit of time to settle. And then I'll guide you through these steps. I'll give you a little bit of time to kind of explore on your own, and then you can evaluate for yourself how valuable this was. So when you're ready, you can close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow, full, deep breaths. On the exhalation, just notice what could relax or soften. Could you relax your tongue and let it fill your lower jaw? Could you soften your belly? And can you feel the palms of your hands? And the soles of your feet? One very important element with intuitive inquiry is to take a few moments to abandon any expectations. Let go of any attachment to the outcome of this meditation. Let this be just a moment-to-moment naming of what your experience is inside. And take a few moments now to kind of go through the files. Is there some decision that you've got lined up ahead of you that isn't clear? And if you don't have one, it's really, really helpful to choose something. What are you going to have for dinner tonight? Chinese or Italian? So take a few moments. Think of a decision that you've got ahead of you. Now, we're going to take a few moments to just the sense when you think about this issue, kind of this unresolved conflict. What's that like on the inside? When you relax through the midline and the core, you might look for any sensations that feel strong and unmistakable or fleeting or maybe a little vague or unformed. What do you feel? How does your nervous system hold this issue? How long has this been living on the inside? You might take a little time now just to reflect, what are your options? Can you come up with 2 options, maybe 3, but 2 very clear paths that you might investigate? Just take a moment here to clarify option A, option B, maybe option C. If you need a little more time, you might hit pause, but otherwise, just sense which of these options would you like to investigate. It doesn't matter which one, but one might sort of like feel a little more compelling than the other. And then in your own way, very clearly tell your body, this is the one we're going to do. And take some time to imagine yourself following this option. And as you do so, what felt sense begins to form on the inside? How intimately can you locate what's there? It might develop quickly, it might develop slowly. Can you identify a particular shape or color here? If you let this feeling get big, how big could it get? Taking some time now just to reflect on, is there an unmet need? Is there something that you would be wanting or hoping for that would allow this path to be successful? If you had that, what would that feel like? What would that be like? And sensing now whatever may have shifted inside. You're sensing what you've noted, what you felt. And exploring this following question now, just noticing what spontaneously arises. Regarding this decision, what advice do you have to give yourself? And if you were to follow that advice, not perfectly, not all the time, what would that be like? What would that feel like? And taking some time now just to let this fall away. Just notice, what do you feel right now? What is the quality of presence right now? And can you be with this? And in these final moments, as you reflect on this inquiry, it's possible there may not be total clarity, but you might trust that you planted a very deep seed. And you might trust that as you continue to hold this with curiosity and with mindfulness, that this wisdom faculty will find a way to communicate with the conscious mind sometime soon. And when you're ready, you can begin to deepen the breath. With your eyes closed, you might let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right, and take a moment to stretch out in any way that feels good for you. How does your body want you to move right now? And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And welcome back.
Thank you, Jonathan. You know, I had an experience of the path that I felt lit up about taking. When I really felt into that, I had a visual of a balloon sort of expanding, and my attention was drawn this way. I felt like my eyes were turned, toward the right. And as this balloon expanded, there was some kind of big, sharp, like a shard or something that was kind of stuck in the ground. And as it expanded against this thing, it popped. And I felt like, okay, let me bring some attention to this. What is this? Is it an obstacle? And again, it like turned my attention that way. Mm-hmm. And I started getting involved in, okay, what does that need? What is it asking of me? How can I allow this to unfold and yield its wisdom to me in the days ahead or like in my life? How can I look for signs? And so I wonder if that is a sort of response that you've heard before, like people getting sometimes focused in one area or versus another as they sit with the experience of this meditation. Because I know that oftentimes we might be concerned with not doing it right, and going into sort of judgment about that. Can you say a little bit about just the process?
Well, first, let me ask you, is there a sense of what that shard was all about?
I felt almost as though it was like some sort of agreement or stake in the ground to honor something old, like an agreement that said, okay, you will not go beyond this experience in order to stay with the tribe or to be true to whatever, like one of those deep ancestral things, and it seemed like it was very old and embedded, almost maybe a generational or cultural or thing. That's what I felt like it was emanating from, because it was big and deep and stuck.
Wow, that's so cool. But it's there's something like, again, when we're moving into like below the line, what powerful images. Like here's an expansive balloon, and then here's this shard, and when you really sense the shard, it has to do with generational ancestry and investigating that would be fascinating. But again, we're looking at the interconnectivity of things.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, when I guide people into like getting more acclimated to positive states, and so you think about something that just filled with love, and someone goes to their puppy and they just feel all this expansiveness, and then they start to feel sad because they recognize that the puppy is going to die, or they think about other dogs they've had, or they think about someone they love and they realize, but I miss so much of their life. And it is all part of that interconnectedness, which is fascinating. But I think it's also like, if you were to go, to stay with that inquiry, it'd be fascinating to really explore that shard and, how does it want you to be with it? And like just as you described it, again, you're using language, which is above the line, to describe this incredible, all this information through the felt sense. So the more you're describing it and getting to know it, it'll reveal more and more. I have no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
What I love in doing this inquiry, it's something that the Buddha allegedly said. I mean, who knows what he really said? There's a tendency when we do this kind of work to want to figure it out. But I love substituting the word "get familiar with" for the word "figure it out." Because as the Buddha allegedly said, familiarity leads to wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So as you take time, when you're visited by that shard in your meditation, however it shows up, like to really move into, wow, so where do I feel this? Like, how old is this? How long have I carried this? How does it want me to be with it? It will continue to reveal more. And you may find that on some level, it may feel like a liability, but you also may find in some way it's a profound asset, as you're investigating the unfolding of your life.
And so in this work, do you find that there is an outward expression or reflection of this work that we're doing so that is so deeply interior? Like maybe phrases or books pop up or little bits of conversation or something that just is kind of speaking to us in the outer world as well.
Yeah, it's incredible. For those of us who are more visual, we're going to get lots of visual imagery. Some of us are more auditory, and then we got little snippets of words or a phrase, or there was somebody who was like working this issue, working an issue in his life, and then he said, damn, this song keeps coming in, like kept pushing out of the way and going back in the investigation. And then finally, after all this struggle, he said, okay, well, let me just investigate the song. Like, what's the song? And the song was Let It Be.
Yep.
This whole intuitive faculty can only communicate through images and through all the ways that we process, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and direct cognition. So it's sort of like being really awake, but then always coming back, because the most challenging form of intuition to develop is the kinesthetic, but it's also the most reliable. And that is like when you're thinking, okay, Chinese or Indian food tonight, okay, let's say Indian. Let me just, oh yeah, that feels good. Like you're looking for that resonance in the body, and that will always be, in my experience, that's a profound place to keep going back to.
Well, Jonathan, when you say that it's the most difficult sort of intuition to cultivate, it brings up a couple of questions for me. One is what you might have to say to people who willfully have created barriers to intimacy with their bodies. Maybe there's an issue of food or drug or some other substance abuse, or something that creates a buffer between us and our bodies, because perhaps our bodies have, the body has betrayed the person, in a past experience. How can we develop a sense of just coming together with the body and reestablishing just a sort of an awareness of it? Because I often feel or hear from a lot of people that, it's not until later in life that they say, oh, I'm just realizing now that I even have a body, and so to go into this very deep work, how do we go even beyond, like, back before square one to get to this work?
Yeah, that's such a profound question. I really thank you for that. There's a joke that says, when you meditate, you'll feel better. Feel your depression better, you feel your anger better, you feel your trauma better,
Right.
It's true.
Yeah.
You feel everything better when you begin to tune into a sense-based practice. And the interesting thing I find when you do this work, when you're really tuning into energy, because the energy in your body, it has an intelligence. If you break your arm, you set it and rest it, and it knows how to heal. You could also say that intelligence of the body, it's evolutionary. We spend so much time shutting it down and trying to control it. So when we experience trauma in the body, and trauma is fear and helplessness, there's no one who hasn't experienced fear and helplessness at some point. That's encoded in your body. Your issues are in your tissues. So when we go back to that acronym of RAIN, you recognize what's happening. Okay, I'm really terrified right now. And then you move into the A. Can I allow it? Can I actually accept this? The answer may be no, because you might be flooded, or you feel overwhelmed, or it doesn't feel safe. And that's really, really critical, to really ask yourself, okay, it doesn't feel safe. And that's where another time, when the conditions are different, or having some support, will make all the difference in the world. But I'm actually doing a series right now on transforming your relationship with pain. And when you work with trauma, when people experience severe trauma, one of the pivotal questions that you can ask someone is, where don't you feel it? And when people are experiencing severe trauma, and they do that quite often, and it's occurred to me a number of times where people say this to me, tip of my nose, or let's say my earlobes, because there are fewer nerve endings there. And so then it becomes a very interesting process. There's so much more to go in here, but I think it's really, really helpful that when you feel overwhelmed, where don't you feel it? When I'm at the dentist, my mind fixates on where the pain, fixates on the drill and all that stuff. And as soon as the drill's away, my tongue is like checking it out. Like, we can't not go to where the pain is. So what my technique, my hands feel fine. I keep my attention in my hands. I don't feel it in my hands. So when you're exploring trauma work, you'll create a resource state, which can be a place in your body where you don't feel it. And just as in meditation with breath or sound as your anchor, that's your anchor. Okay, so the hands are my anchor. This is where I'm hanging out. And then you can learn these very, very cool techniques of, they're called titration and pendulation, where you go to the edge of where you feel the unpleasant sensation and just hang out on the edge. And then when it's too much, you come back to the anchor. And when I do that with a migraine, or with pain in the body, or like with strong emotion, I'll have this sense I can bear it. Not all at once, but either I can bear it by establishing my attention to where it feels neutral or pleasant, or I can bear it in tiny little bite-sized pieces. And then the other technique is called pendulation, where you actually kind of swing your awareness from the edge of the unpleasant back to the pleasant. And again, it gives you that sense of like, not all at once, but in tiny little pieces, I can actually be with this. And things begin to shift in powerful ways that way.
One of the things that I found so deeply interesting about the exercise that you were sharing, or you were walking us through your experience before leading us into the exercise. And you were saying that when you received the invitation to speak at the school, you then started avoiding responding to the emails. And what you did was you investigated that and you went further in. And with this sort of intuition, it seems as though we might be more inclined to just say, okay, I'm having such a visceral response here, or I'm not responding. That tells me no, without taking it down the road to that further investigation. Can you talk a little bit more about one of those characteristics of the feeling tone? Because you were saying that, and I might be pairing these incorrectly, but you said that one of the characteristics of cultivating a feeling tone was that it might feel vague or amorphous or like something. And so in the experience with that email, there was something, but it told you no. But the feeling tone was clear that it wasn't something that you necessarily were excited about. Can you help us distinguish between when a no is a no, even if it's vague, or when we need to really go into the RAIN technique or drill down more deeply into our response?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. Mark Twain said when a cat sits on a hot stove, it'll never sit on a hot stove again, but it won't sit on a cold one either. We have these reactive patterns. And my first reaction when I got the invitation was yes, because that was greed. I was like, oh, I've never done that before. Sure. And then when I sat with it, and again, fear and helplessness, it was like a little trauma thing. There's like, what am I going to do? This doesn't feel right. It was a strong aversion, and then it felt like a no. And so there's a wonderful distinction that the teacher Sophie Rinpoche makes, is that the distinction between real and true. Like the no felt real, but was it true? And that's where, by taking the time, it could have been that I might have gone down that road and say, okay, I'm going to say yes. And I would have gotten a very strong sense from my body, like, no. And if I go back, I verify, be like, no, this is not the right thing to do. But that isn't what happened, for me. So it's as I like to say, it's an organic process. And another way of describing it is it's sloppy because it's all so interconnected. But again, when you keep coming back to the body with that sincere desire to really sense what is true, the body's going to give you information. It really will, when we can move into a receptive place.
So, okay, receptivity. I had a personal experience of being surprised by some body wisdom. And it was a completely harmless event that sort of flipped a switch in me. All right. I there was a guy, and I saw, and I liked him, and he had a wedding ring, and I was like, oh my God. Don't tell anybody. Okay, so
I'm glad it's only you and me here.
It's just the two of us. So then I was like, okay, but I was talking to a girlfriend about it later, and I was surprised at how deeply sad I was, because it felt like it had flipped a switch into something else. And it stayed with me for a while. And she was like, I know it feels really bad right now, or maybe it feels excessive, but you don't have to name it. Maybe you can just be with it and not heap on all the things behind it, or, poor judgment, or, why weren't you looking, or any of those things, right? And sure enough, it led me into an experience of like grief that had, it was like the scab that had just sort of, bled out or whatever. But the thing about it is, I'm wondering, how important is it that we know what it is we're releasing when we touch on these spaces of information, when maybe we haven't really investigated down that path, but we were just receptive to our body's information anyway? Like, how would you suggest we be with experiences like that while we're cultivating this practice?
Wow, what an awesome question. And let's take a couple hours on this one.
Right.
But there are a couple things here. Like, one is, and it's so cool that you kind of felt the crash, and then you stayed with it. And then you got, this is grief. And then you made room for it, and I'm reminded by, I think it's Khalil Gibran, who said, unless you grieve fully, you will cry, but not all your tears, and you will laugh, but not all your laughter, And there's something very profound around really making room for the grief. And, and grief is a really interesting one because it comes in rogue waves.
Yeah.
And what I have found when I've experienced loss, this has been one of the most amazing experiences of my life, is when I lost my 15-year-old dog, my best friend for 15 years. I decided that whenever I felt a grief wave, I was going to stay on the wave until I couldn't find it anymore. And I was astounded at how, number one, very, very rich, but how I moved through the grief much faster than I thought. And it's not to say there wasn't sadness and all of that, but the intensity of the grief really, really shifted. So it becomes a very interesting question. Like, when you're really tuning into the body in that thing of prana and chitta, like when you're really allowing the prana to flow, what are we letting go of? Mm-hmm. Who knows? Who knows? As you're with that grief, how much of that grief is part of the inheritance through your family system, if you're really, really being with it and letting it go. And quite often, I really find that when the energy is really, really strong in meditation or in some cathartic event, I have certainly had this experience where I'm experiencing a very strong emotion with no content. I don't have a story that goes with the feeling, but it's being released from my body. It's such a mystery.
Yeah. And as I'm hearing you speak, it feels almost like there is an allowing or an invitation to allow for that mystery in the process of becoming safe and recognizing and allowing and investigating and all of the things. Is there one particular place that you might suggest someone who is new to this work begin? Like, what's one practice or one way in that we might start and sustain that for a while before delving more deeply into this work?
Yeah. I would say there's one thing that trumps years and years of experience and practice, and it's sincerity. That when you move into an inquiry with sincerity, there's something about that is unshakable. It's like to have that really sincere desire to feel more whole, a really sincere desire to be informed in some way that might create a more wholesome state inside. That's a very high state to cultivate.
Can you share a little bit about the value of doing the RAIN technique in partnership with a trusted other person?
Yeah, it's, I find doing this work alone is very profound. Doing it in the relational field is incredibly profound. I also find there's something about this, doing this kind of investigation is when there's something about the practice. And when I teach this, it gets dramatically amplified when you are describing your experience out loud. Because just like in meditation, you can have 1,000 thoughts passing through, but when you speak them, you're just crystallizing it. And when you're speaking and someone is present, it's tremendously powerful. To really find the language that resonates with what's below the line can bring it, number one, brings it dramatically to the surface for you as the listener, but then for the speaker, but as the listener, to hold that empathic, non-fixing presence for another person. I don't know of any more profound way to cultivate intimacy than that.
I actually tried this process once, and I found that in the first few minutes, it was almost like mind chatter. You know how when you're journaling, or sometimes when I journal, I'm just kind of burning through the thoughts of the day, or just random kind of threads and strands of ideas or experiences. And I felt like in the moment, while I was trying to recognize what was up for me, there was a lot of that sort of, debris. And it took a while to kind of get down into what was really up. And I felt like that was, and you mentioned a great act of intimacy. I felt very vulnerable in the process. How can we go about recognizing people who we can trust with this work? What is their, what should we be looking for if we do want to extend this work outward with someone else?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're really on for transformation, the prerequisite, just from what I've seen, the prerequisite is you feel safe. Because I think there was some teacher who said that there's not a heart in the entire universe that would not open instantly if it did not feel safe enough. So we have to create a safe field for this inquiry. And so part of the rules in this practice when you're doing it relationally is confidentiality, non-fixing listening. So it's no advice giving, no reflecting back, no clarifying questions, just being the silent observer. Because as I like to say to people, if you ever had that experience where there's something going on, you don't quite know what it is, and then we think, oh, I should find a therapist or someone to help me get out this. Well, what I found is, no knock on therapists, but quite often what I really need is someone to hold the space for me to discover what's there by simply naming it out loud. So that's a prerequisite, is to someone who really understands cultivating safety. And just as if I'm unloading something, the last thing I'm looking for is someone to give me advice or to tell me their story. When we can give ourselves that gift, wow, it's just unbelievable, really unbelievable. To really trust that it's true, everything you seek is found within. And all you need is the space in which to do the process of mining and peeling the onion, to mix two metaphors.
Yes. It almost feels as though this kind of work sets us on a path that there really is no turning back from. Does that seem true in your experience? Because what else is there really?
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. That once again, like once you've taken, the red pill,
yeah,
you start to see more clearly. This practice is all about seeing into the nature of reality. And when you begin to really be on for being awake, everything that's between you and feeling free is going to begin to present itself. It's a fascinating thing, and so the more you practice meditation and non-judging awareness, the more you strengthen the witness, your capacity to observe objectively and clearly. But at the same time, as you're kind of unpeeling the onion as to who you are, you begin to contact stuff that's really subterranean, like the shard, like your sense of like there's something incredibly deep there. There's something generational going on there. Like, how do you make contact with all that nonverbal stuff that forms our character structure? And this is why I find that doing this deep body-centered inquiry becomes a way to access the richness of that content.
So, Jonathan, I want to take this back around to around the beginning of the presentation. You were saying that a belief is calcified thought, which then becomes habit and then eventually character, right? And so this work helps us kind of dissolve that or relax that. My question is, if we are without some of those habits and some of those deeply or long-held beliefs, and we are truly present to the moment without a lot of that other information kind of informing our behavior and our character, it seems like our identity then is really malleable. Where are we in the process of cultivating this body intuition when we're showing up as new being? Now, let me work through this question as it was really great while I was thinking about it, but it's tricky kind of teasing it out now. But it's like, if our sense of identity and our character is less of a thing when we show up to the moment, who are we really, right? Like, if all of this information is housed in our body and we're trying to relax it in order to come to the moment to get the information from the body, it seems like a lot to sift through. And maybe I'm spun up too much into my head about it, but it really, brought up a series of questions around that for me. Like, again, about reality and about what's true in any given moment. Do you have any thoughts there?
It's so rich. Well, it really points to kind of the essence of, again, something the Buddha allegedly said, So if you look really, really closely at the moment-to-moment phenomena arising in the moment, you might begin to recognize three characteristics of reality. So don't believe a word of what I'm telling you, but you might verify this. The first is impermanence. You begin to see that everything that's born of causes and conditions is going to change. So that's the body, our thoughts, our beliefs, all of it is subject to change. And recognizing that is huge. The second thing you begin to notice is about your relationship to what's changing. That if you resist change, or you want something to change and it isn't changing, the result is going to be stress and suffering and dissatisfaction. So, the more you hang on, the more you're going to get rope burn. The more you let go, as the saying goes, you let go a little bit, you're going to feel a little bit of ease. You let go a lot, you're going to feel a lot of ease. But then the third thing that he pointed to, which is exactly what you're naming, is you begin to see into the nature of the self. And you begin to recognize that there's an element of yourself which is born of causes and conditions. You've got you have your parents, and then your culture, and all those influences form your character structure. All of your traumas and all of your delights are all kind of encoded in the body. But then he said, but you may begin to discover that there's also a self that is unconditioned. That there's some quality of this self which is not touched by greed or fear or delusion. And my sense is, and again, just my sense, that the more we kind of unpeel that onion, the more that sense of unconditioned awareness begins to show up. Which is why so many people who begin a meditation practice, after a while, they say like, I don't like my friends anymore. Or I don't like watching these kind of movies anymore. Like there's something else I want, because that there are parts of us that kind of fall away. And I think that's, as we become less reactive to life, and then we're more responsive to life. But then I think as we keep going, it gets kind of out there because we're less bound by our conditioning. Good news and bad news.
We feel it all better, as you said.
Exactly. Yeah, we feel our unconditioned self better.
Jonathan Foust, what a wonderful time with you today.
Totally fun to be with you. Really enjoyed it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank those of you who joined us for today's session. Please note that the recording of this session will remain accessible for free for 24 hours. And if you wish, you can purchase the entire summit with lifetime access to each recording, transcripts from each session, and bonus gifts from our presenters. For Sounds True, I'm Christy Peoples, here again with Jonathan Foust, thanking you all so very much for being with us. SoundsTrue.com, waking up the world.